Ross, can you confirm that we're going live?
Chair, I can confirm, Ross has confirmed that we are live now.
We are live. Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Audit Committee meeting held on Wednesday, the 24th of March. This is the last Audit Committee meeting of the term. I feel that should be playing some Frank Sinatra in the background. I'll be saying a bit more at the end, but I would just like to say at this stage, many thanks to all the committee past and present, all the internal and external auditors past and present, and all the support we've had from all the committee members and officers. And I don't think people would mind me particularly mentioning Kay Norris, who's been our clerk, who's now retired. So thank her for all her work. And my deputy, Mark Swinburne, and Alison Mitchell and Kevin McDonald. So the first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. Leslie's kindly clerking this meeting for us. So Leslie, could you give us apologies for absence and then just read through the list for members to indicate whether they're present or not?
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies from Councillor Castle and Councillor Rickaby and from Kelly Angus. And if we go through, so it's Councillor Dickinson.
Wrong button, that was my hand. I am here, but I do need to leave early for a hospital appointment, Leslie.
Thank you. Councillor Grimshaw.
Present.
Councillor Hill.
Present.
Councillor Purvis.
Present.
Councillor Swinburne.
Present.
Councillor Towns. Mr. Topping.
Yep.
And Mr. Watson.
Present.
Okay, thank you. Item number 2 is the minutes. Minutes of the meeting of the Audit Committee held on the 27th of January 2021 are circulated to be confirmed as a true record. If anyone has any comments to those, could they raise an electric hand? Councillor Towns.
Sorry, that wasn't an electric hand, but thank you anyway, Chair. I just have a quick question. Pages 10 to 12 on the white papers cover the discussion on what was I thought a confidential report. I'm just wondering why would the minutes not normally be on pink papers because they're appertaining to a confidential report. Just wondering why they're not, unless I've got that wrong. Sorry.
I thought that discussion was in the mirror. There was related matters in the closed session, but that was part of the open session, was it not? I don't know if anyone else can.
To be honest, I can't quite remember, but I just maybe I'm confusing the two, Chair. So.
Thank you. As far as I'm aware, if anyone else, Daljet?
Sorry, Chair. Not specifically about these minutes, but we have received that query before about different confidential meetings, and the advice from the monitoring officer at that time was that confidential meetings could be in the public part of the papers, but it was actually the confidential issues that couldn't be related to, which I did find, I'll be honest, a little bit confusing, but that is apparently custom and practice. I'm not saying it's absolute about these minutes, but it was just an explanation I'd had previously. I think it was about some cabinet minutes, that as long as the information that was, because obviously the main thing for us is about being transparent and open with the public, but if there was a confidential item, it was actually the confidentiality around the item and the specifics that were to remain confidential, but the minutes could refer to the item. So hopefully that is an explanation, but happy to have the monitoring officer in writing to advise the committee if that would be easier.
Is that because sometimes obviously there's items that the discussion could lead to disclosure of things that are confidential relating to staffing, but the minutes summarise what discussion is not confidential?
Yeah.
Okay. Could somebody either physically or electronically hand indicate that they'd like to propose that the minutes are a true record? Lynn Grimshaw, seconded by Mark Swinburne. Can I just see a show of hands that everyone's content that they're accurate, electronically or physical hand? Many thanks. The next item is our disclosure of members' interests. If any member has any personal pecuniary or any other reason that they think that they should declare an interest in any of the items. Do I see any hands? So I can take it. There is not. No items of the agenda. Anyone any interests? No? Okay. Item 4, Statement of Accounts 2021. The purpose of this report is to provide the committee with an overview of the timetable for publishing the 2021 Statement of Accounts and the accounting policies to be adopted in complying the 2021 Statement of Accounts. These are set out on page 15 and 42. Who would like to speak? Councillor Grimshaw, do you have a point of order?
Thank you, Chair. May I just ask first, just for clarification, that you know what, we're asking to go through these 2021 accounts, yet we had qualified for 17, 18, 18, 19, and we haven't been qualified for 19, 20. And now we're discussing 2021. May I ask if there's an update with regard to why we haven't received those accounts, please, or any particular reason why it's that, you know, they're not in the public domain, please, Chair, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Would you like me to
yes, please.
answer that question? The audit of the 2019-20 accounts has not yet been completed. And we do have Cameron here from Mazars, who's going to give a verbal update on the progress of the external audit of those accounts. So this is just setting out the timetable for producing and publishing the accounts for the current financial year 2021. So it is a rather unusual position to be embarking on the production of one set of accounts when you haven't actually finished the external audit of the previous year's accounts, but that is the position that we're in, Councillor Grimshaw.
Thank you. May I come back, Chair, with your permission?
Of course.
May I ask Jen, you know, when is there a date of completion here? You know, we'll be hearing, you know, with regard to this soon, or is it just a long ongoing process? It just for clarification, but thank you anyway, Jen, for updating me. I do appreciate it.
Yes, well, I believe Cameron is going to give that verbal update a bit later in the meeting, but Chair, if you want him to come in and address that point now, I'm sure he'd be happy to.
That's fine. Cameron, would you like to come in, or should we just progress with the report and we'll get to you later on?
Do you mind if I just quickly say a couple of non-Northumberland specific points just now, and then I'll do a little bit more detail in terms of where Northumberland's at. So the first point is the council's draft accounts from 2019-20 are actually on the website, because you've got to publish draft accounts. So anybody that wants to look at the draft accounts prior to audit can do so on the website, because that's a requirement of the regulations. The second point, I think, is due to the pandemic and various other factors. At the end of November last year, which was the deadline, there was around about 55% of local public audits were missed the deadline. And there's still, my understanding is around about 30 to 40%. So around about a third still outstanding at this point in time as well. So Northumberland's not particularly unusual in that regard for various different reasons. I'll come back later, Chair, in the agenda to talk about where we're actually at in terms of the audit. We've made reasonably good progress, but there's a few areas where we're in discussion with Jan and her team around about some particular issues around about valuations.
Great, thank you. Scott?
Sorry, I don't want to drag this out, Chair, at all, but I do think it's important, while potentially the public are watching, that we understand that if the Cameron's advising that the only reason they are not audited and signed off and dealt with is because of the pandemic, because that's the impression I've just received as a committee member. So is that what we're saying? There's nothing else outstanding other than delayed work because of the pandemic, no other issues?
No, that's not what I'm saying, Chair.
I think the sort of wider issues and where we are with the accounts and the annual governance statement are going to come in later on in the agenda. So Jan, for anyone who's watching, who's our interim executive director in finance and our section 151 officer, are you going to present the report?
Yes, Chair. I'm just going to make just some very brief comments just to put this in context. So this is setting out the timetable for the publication of the draft accounts and then the audited accounts for the 2021 financial year. So the team are about to start work on producing those draft accounts in the next few weeks. Just to clarify, the report does talk about there prospectively being changes to the regulations that set out the publication dates. We have had confirmation now from MHCLG that the publication date for the draft accounts is going to be moved to the 1st of August for the next 2 years. So that will be the 2021 accounts and 21-22 accounts. And the date for the publication of the audited accounts has been moved back to the 30th of September. So we were expecting those changes, but we've had confirmation that the regulations are about to be laid to give legal force to those. So I think that that's helpful, and the work programme that is later on your agenda does actually reflect those later dates. The only other thing to say is that as always, you know, at this time of year, we look at whether there are any changes required to the accounting policies, which will form the basis for the accounts. And this year there are just some minor changes, the most significant being, you know, the fact that we're no longer the pension fund authority. Other than that, it's just a bit of tidying up. So happy to take any questions that the committee may have.
That's great, thank you very much. So I'll take questions on that. Scott?
Oh, apologies, that's an old hand, Chair.
That's an old hand, okay. Does anyone have a new hand? Does anyone have any questions on that? So we're just been asked to note the timetable and approve the changes to the policies. Can I see a show of hands? Everyone's content with that? Electronically or? Okay, nobody has any issue with that. Thank you very much. Item 5 is the counter fraud interim report, which is set out on pages 43 and 50. And the purpose of this report is to update the committee on work undertaken by the corporate fraud team within the council covering the period April 2020, 30th of September 2020. Jan, is this you, or do we have somebody specifically from the fraud team?
Sorry, Chair. Yes, this is my report, so I'm happy to just give a brief introduction. So the report covers the period April to September 2020. As you would expect, the pandemic has had a significant impact on the amount of fraud work that the team have been able to undertake, and in particular, joint work with the DWP was suspended during this period, and there was limited capacity for undertaking proactive fraud work. But the team have continued to follow up new referrals. So we had 244 external fraud referrals during that period, and you have a breakdown of those in the report. No new internal fraud referrals, but we do have one referral still open, which we are progressing, and the team are giving priority to right to buy, tenancy fraud and money laundering checks, and there were no directed surveillance applications during that period either. So that's the overview, but happy to take any specific questions that you may have.
Okay. Is there anything, obviously one of the, I don't know the timescales, if it's just ahead of COVID, but there has been some suggestions of fraudulent COVID grant claims. And this is a general point, I'm not saying specifically in Northumberland, but I presume the wheel of experiences as well as elsewhere's have.
Yes, that's quite right. And we are required to undertake both pre and post payment checks. And the internal audit team have been assisting with that. I don't know whether Kevin wants to come in and comment further on that, but it is quite onerous, the amount of checking that we're required to do. And obviously the more prepayment checks and verification that you can do, you know, the less of the need there is for post payment. But we are cooperating with other councils. There is a national database which is being compiled to allow us to sort of do some of that cross verification to pick up on large scale fraud. But as I say, Kevin might want to comment further on that.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yes, Chair. Thanks, Jan. Basically, just not really a great deal to add to everything Jan said, just to kind of verify and kind of agree with Jan that work does continue. Initially, when the first COVID business grants came in, there was a huge drive, understandably, from government to get that money paid out as fast as possible, with the emphasis being on the post-payment assurance check-in, which continues even now in March 21. But equally now, as the other grants were coming on stream, we were able to do far more of the pre-payment check-in, which Jan explained. And then we still have all of the reports and reporting lines through to government, which we continue to do. And indeed, again, as Jan's outlined, there is now a national data matching exercise being included as well to pick up any matches for investigation by the authority as relevant.
Thank you. Scott, is that a new hand?
It is indeed, Chair. I've mastered the art of putting it up and down. In terms of Kevin, I don't know if it's Kevin or Jan really, but obviously elected members come under a great deal of pressure from groups of excluded businesses and things that didn't fit criteria, didn't meet need, etc., etc. So I think this is a critical thing in terms of where potential COVID money mismanagement, in terms of not on our part, but in terms of businesses applying who managed to get through the system, who weren't entitled, shouldn't have been paid, etc., etc. And I appreciate that's an ongoing piece of work which you've just described, Kevin. But at what point will that be in a report with the detail listed? Because I think it's important, if we have somebody who fraudulently claims council tax relief or doesn't pay the council tax, then it's in the public domain, it's in the newspapers, and they go to court, etc., etc. I think with this, it needs to be that open and transparent. So I particularly would like to see a report brought forward that clearly indicates companies, individuals, and others who fraudulently accessed pandemic money that could have been used for other things. So I'm just wondering what kind of time scale we're looking at, and I appreciate it's still evolving because there are still funds open and other things. I think from an audit point of view, we should specifically be looking at the discretionary rate grant funding as well, and how that was applied, where it went, and what kind of proportion may well need to be looked at as to whether it should or should not have been given.
That's fine. Jan, do you want to come back on that, and maybe just what the future reporting is going to be, and if there will be specific names given if there is that activity?
Yes, so Chair, in exactly the same way as we would, prosecute cases of fraud in relation to council tax, business rates, or anything else. The intention would be, that where we do identify people who have claimed business grants fraudulently, that we would take the appropriate legal action against them. So that will be in the public domain in exactly the same way as any other prosecutions would be. In terms of the timing, I think we would intend to produce a report, you know, summarising the outcome of all of those post-payment checks. But it's a question of at what point we do that. I mean, the team are going to be busy administering business grants for some months to come yet. So I think probably the timing for that would be around the summer. And I believe that there is also an intention to produce a national report, which is looking across all councils at the incidence of fraud as well. So I think, you know, that would provide some context for our local statistics. But I don't know if Kevin knows anything more about that.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, John. No, I don't know any more detail. I mean, even just yesterday, we received more guidance through for another set of checks which have to be done for another grant. So this work clearly does continue. I think I would just agree with Jan. I think the timing is going to be key, but I would imagine that at some point in time, we would be able to compile a report, both in terms of from the service perspective of these were the grants funding received and how that grant funding was allocated, and then from the more the audit checking side, if you like, around any fraudulent or payments made in error that were identified. So I think that would be possible. It's just a matter of the timing being key, as Jan's outlined, Chair.
And can I just ask, as I see other hands coming up, so can I just into what happens if a company fraudulently claims money and then goes into administration, ceases to be, would the directors be would you just prosecute the directors of that company? Does somebody want to go? Because I've just been reading and hearing about sort of various things, and there's people like companies into administration in a way to try to get out of debt collection activity, and it could, I presume it potentially could be if it's fraudulent activity as well. But would you pursue the directors in that case?
I believe you would have the ability to pursue the directors if you had evidence, you know, that it had been done fraudulently. But of course, businesses are liquidated all the time, you know, and you know, and particularly in the current climate. So it would be about whether you had enough evidence to be able to pursue them. You know, you would have to deal with that on a case-by-case basis, I think. One thing I would say is that the government have said that they will not seek to claw back the grant money that they've given us, you know, on the basis that fraudulent claims have been made, provided that we have, you know, complied with the relevant guidance in terms of the amount and quality of checking that we've done, both pre and post payment. So in a way, we are insulated against financial risk of fraud of that nature. But nevertheless, it's public money, and you know, we have a responsibility to ensure that you know, if people have claimed fraudulently, that we then pursue them to recover that money.
Great. Sorry, I've seen a number of hands. I think Mark Purvis, did you have your hand up?
I did, thanks, Chair. It was just a kind of, it's more of comment than just a couple of queries. Is thanks to Kevin and his team for all the hard work again, because I mean, you know, through these difficult times, it's hard enough without having to do this your job on top of what's being done. Just a couple of things, you know, when the external fraud, when it says other 15, what can you just give us a little? It's more of an interest. What's the other kind of 15? That would kind of that, Kevin. And the other one is about the cyclist who was wanting to claim all this money, the triathlon. You know, people like that need named and shamed. I don't know how you're going to ruin things like that, you know what I mean? But that's absolutely disgusting. Just your thoughts, Kevin, please.
Yep. Chair, if I can just come back on that, I'm not going to take all the credit for Barry's team's hard work. So I think thank you, Councillor Purvis, but I'd kind of pass to Jan or Barry to answer. Thanks.
Jan?
I'm sorry, Chair, I don't have the breakdown of those additional 15 cases to hand, and I can't see Barry here. So can we follow that up in writing after the meeting?
Oh, I see Barry.
I am here, Chair.
Oh, Barry is there.
I'm trying to find a hand to put up. I can't find it.
Great.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just in answer to the question with regards to other, it's normally DWP referrals that we don't categorise on our fraud management system, so they just go into a category of other referrals that come in that we would naturally pass across to DWP without any involvement from ourselves. And I'm trying to remember, was there a follow-up question to that?
I was just asking about kind of the lady on the bike that does.
Oh, yes.
There's obviously fit on everybody on here, but then claiming that she's got all these injuries to that. And what follow-up is that from things like that, Barry, when people's blatantly kind of trying to get public money to the council, you know what I mean?
Yeah. This was the reason why I explained these two cases, were just the level of reserve that's put on these claims from the insurance company. I thought I'd give a little bit more detail because they are both quite high. But certainly with the cyclist, we would always look at, in cases of a high value, to consider prosecution. And when considering prosecution, there's obviously certain acts and laws that we have to follow to be able to continue with any prosecution. In this particular case of the cyclist, who probably was one of the fittest persons I've ever seen on paper, we had actually spoken to her when we suspected an offence had been committed. Now, when we suspect an offence had been committed, we're meant to caution them at that point and place them under caution before continuing with any questions. Unfortunately, in this case, the investigator did continue with her inquiries before placing her under caution. So we weren't able to continue with any consideration of prosecution action for this one. But we do certainly do that in all other cases. I guess fortunately for this person, that happened, because it would have been a case as an attempted fraud, and that we would have pursued through the courts.
No bother. It was just thanks for that. Thanks for all the team that's been involved. That didn't just mean Kevin. Okay, thank you.
Okay, next, Nick.
Thank you, Chair. Just worth saying a few words about the business grants. I think that somebody mentioned the sort of excluded people, and it has been the case that some people have been excluded. These business grants were aimed primarily at dealing with fixed property costs, and but we did receive some more money from government, or the promise of some more money from government in the budget, and that's allowed us to extend the scheme. So that went live on Monday, and it's the business resilience grant, which has now been extended, and eligibility criteria have been relaxed to allow more businesses to apply. So you know, that will bring in more of those people. Obviously it won't help everybody, and I think that would be, you know, we're just not in a position to do that. There isn't enough money in the pot. I think the other point worth making is that with the current schemes as they are and the expected take-up rates, all of the money, all of the discretionary money, we are expecting to use, and we're doing everything we can to try and get that money out to businesses as quickly as possible. It's been a phenomenal effort by, you know, the Revs and Bens team in particular, but with support from legal, from policy, from internal audit, and the finance team, and Advance as well. So there's been it's really been a sort of cross-department effort. I think we're up to about 15 different schemes now. So every one of those has to go through a process. IT have to design forms, and that's been an amazing effort as well. And you know, so it's become an industry for the past 12 months, and a lot of work has gone into it. Hopefully we're now in the sort of home stretch, and you know, many businesses will be allowed to open again on the 14th of April, and then many more, I think, on the 17th of May. So hopefully we can see some light at the end of the tunnel, but it's been a difficult time for most businesses, but 140 million pounds has been paid out to Northumberland businesses.
Okay, thank you. David, I saw your hand up and then it went down. Is that
really? Councillor Purvis asked the question that I wanted, because
okay?
There was no follow-up about what was very obviously an attempted fraud, which is a criminal act. But Barry's already given the explanation, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Lynn, your hand was up and then down. I'll come to you.
Just with regard to with some of Nick's comments, and I do believe everyone's has been discussing around about the fraudulent claims, and I do think that it's very sad. And that the government has decided not to claw back a lot of this money, because there was a lot of people at the time who didn't qualify for this grant, i.e. people who didn't have businesses run by their own homes, they were running from their homes, and they've been put in a very peculiar position because they have been able to earn an income. So I find it very difficult that the government isn't going to try to claw it back to help some of these people, because obviously they've gone into a lot of debt and they've been excluded. And perhaps Councillor Oliver can enlighten us if these people are now being included in this further grant money that's being allocated, because I do think that we should find out sooner than later how much money has been claimed fraudulently. I think it's on a need to know basis, instead of waiting till probably September, October. I know it's a bit of a daunting task, but I'm sure that there'll be some figures somewhere that we could just be updated with. Sorry to go on, Chair, but perhaps Councillor Oliver could enlighten us whether these people now are included with this further money that's been allocated from the government.
Okay, the whole, just before I come in, Nick, this is obviously a whole big wide area of debate, and I'm sure there'll be lots of ramifications in the future, and I'm sure across the country they're going to say people unfairly missed out, people who fraudulently claimed and got away with it, put in with the realistic about what a kind of unprecedented situation it was. They're in a situation, I know right at the beginning, where the government were telling councils to pay out the money, these businesses, to stop them going down, but then that went against the normal, the checks that you need to do. So it is a huge issue. I'm sure there's going to be ramifications of it, and I'm sure there'll be lots of lessons to be learned for everyone. So I don't want to, because this is obviously a huge issue and could be open-ended, but I will bring Nick in if he wants to respond to any of what.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think as I said earlier, Councillor Grimshaw, I think that, some of those home-based businesses will be now eligible, not all of them. I can't give you precise numbers. I don't think anybody could do that. But certainly the eligibility criteria have been relaxed. It's also worth noting that the self-employment income support scheme and the coronavirus job retention scheme were both significant pots of support from government, worth many billions for people in some of those circumstances. There are, however, people that have missed out for various different reasons, including things like that they've only just started trading and so on. I think, just going on to the point of fraud, I think what Jan Willis was saying was that as long as the council can demonstrate that it's had proper checks in place, then the government won't come to us to claw back that money. That's not the same as saying that the council won't go to businesses that have claimed fraudulently to claw back that money. They're two different things.
Okay, Scott.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't want to open a big debate on this because it is a huge beast. I am a little bit hopeful that some people that didn't fit the criteria originally will now fit it. I am a little bit concerned about Councillor Oliver's terminology around relaxation of guidance, relaxation of rules. I'm confident that the officers will provide a robust system that will make sure this doesn't open up leftover money to further abuse. I think what I would really welcome from an audit point of view when Jan and others are compiling the reports into fraudulent activity and whatnot. I think it's really important that we look at the decision making that led to guidance and inclusion and exclusion and all the other things. Again, I refer back to the discretionary rate fund, because obviously Councillor Oliver referenced advance there helping everybody else out, but there was a huge scenario not long back where, you know, the council was suggesting £8 and a bit million to be given to one of its own companies. That sits very uncomfortably with the public, sits very uncomfortably with me and many other members, and obviously the cabinet changed and made a decision at the time. So I think it's critical that we welcome the news of, you know, funding that's available for people who haven't accessed it before. I really just think there needs to be some pause in terms of relaxation of various rules and guidance around it. If we're saying that it will meet the needs of those people who have genuinely been excluded, that's my concern. I want those people to be included, and I'm sure that's the same for Councillor Oliver and everybody else. What I do not want is further abuse of money that is set out to support people quite clearly during this particular issue. So like I say, it's not open for debate. I don't need a response. It's a comment around terminology and confidence moving forward, that we make sure we get a system that is not open to abuse or interference for people to receive money and others not.
Okay. Does anyone else want to come in? Okay, Nick.
Yeah, just to say, I think we're all on the same page on that. I think every scheme has been through checks. I think internal audit have been involved. I think the legal team have been involved, and I'm confident that there are proper checks in place. I'm not saying that will 100% stop fraud, but I think the latest extension to the BRG scheme is not about relaxing sort of the rules. It's about extending the eligibility criteria, and there's quite an important distinction there.
Okay. Now we've been asked to note the progress and work undertaken by the corporate fraud team. So I'd like to thank Jan for the report, for Barry and the team for all the work. Is obviously everyone happy that we've noted that and we've had a good discussion? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Item 6 is the annual audit committee work programme set out in 51 to 58. This is an updated programme, the core business of the audit committee 21-22, in accordance with our terms of reference as set out in the constitution. Kevin?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair, this is an administrative report which we bring to committee every March, just with a proposed outline of the work programme for the coming year for the committee. As members will recall, having seen it before, we kind of liaise with all the various report authors across the authority and just try to timetable when the reports will come to committee to allow the committee to meet its terms of reference. As committee will recall, obviously in November, council agreed to make audit committee the group parent audit committee. Those requirements aren't yet built into the work programme. They will follow to the next meeting of the committee. I think, as Jan has already alluded to earlier regarding the changing of the accounting deadlines for next year, those have been incorporated in the work programme before the committee today. I think one thing I would point out is, since we pulled the work programme together, I think there is potentially some doubt as to whether the May audit committee will take place, just due to obviously we have the elections coming up and then we need the annual council to take place. So there's a chance that May meeting may not take place. Should that be the case, any of the items of work proposed for the May committee, if we didn't need an extraordinary meeting called, would just move to the July 21 meeting. But happy to take any questions, Chair.
So yeah, I think I'd be right in saying that the annual meeting would be on the Wednesday afternoon, wouldn't it? So the audit committee would have to meet after that, so it would be likely pushed into would it need to be June, or I mean, obviously, or July would be suffice?
I think, Chair, that there's nothing in the main meeting which would be time critical as I see it at the moment. That may be subject to change, but I think especially given that the change in the accounts deadline from the publishing of the draft accounts from May back to the July meeting, I think would suffice.
Great. Okay. Any questions or comments, Mark Swinburne?
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say, given what's planned for May, I think maybe moving that all into July could be a bit bulky. So maybe putting in a meeting in June could be a suggestion, unless, you know, members of the committee at the time, whoever that may be, have any objections. I would suggest possibly looking at holding a June meeting to carry out those requirements. Say, I know there's nothing time bound, but I think trying to squeeze May and July together could be quite a lot to carry out. So just a suggestion that maybe, you know, moving May into June and then having a July meeting could be something that we should possibly consider.
Yeah. I mean, there is a possibility as well, you know, decision to be made in the future, but with the wider remit, and maybe, you know, outstanding things, the audit committee might meet more frequently than it does anyway. Maybe not every month, but 8-9 times a year, for example. But that's obviously for future discussion. Does anyone else have any comments or questions on this report? As you see set out, we're just agreeing the core business work programme, notes that obviously this can be changed or adapted, that additional reports can be presented depending on matters arising, and notes that an update will be provided to the May 2021 meeting, more likely to be July or even or potentially June. So everyone, does anyone dissent to that? No, everyone's happy with that. Yeah. Okay. The next item is the annual review of audit committee effectiveness. The purpose is the report is to present a self-assessment of audit committee arrangements following the review undertaken 2019-20. This is with reference to the good practice recommended by CIPFA, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. Kevin?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Committee will recall in September 19, committee considered a self-assessment document which we'd prepared, which was subsequently followed by a review led by the chair, whereby all serving members of the committee were invited to a session with the chair and myself to discuss the arrangements in place for our audit committee. All members will know that a regular review of our audit committee arrangements is good practice, exactly as the chair's just outlined. Following that initial self-assessment and then the review undertaken in conjunction with the chair, we've just updated on page 63 of the papers the self-assessment questionnaire to reflect the changes which have taken place since the last time, primarily around just updating our audit committee terms of reference to make sure that they were in line with the updated guidance from CIPFA. They were largely cosmetic changes. They were largely adherent to the recommendations from CIPFA anyway, but those changes have now been made and made in the constitution agreed by full council. Chair, I wouldn't propose to go through the table in detail, but happy to take any questions after the committee have had a chance to consider the report today.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Does anyone, I mean, obviously everyone on the committee at the time did individually go through these. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Mark Swinburne?
Thank you, Chair. It's with regards on page 63 to item 2. It says, does the audit committee report directly to full council? And the comment says, minutes of all audit committee meetings reported to the next meeting of full council as a matter of course. And that's being ticked as yes. So want to ask if that now needs to be amended, because with the meetings that we've had this year, that hasn't taken place. So I need to question if that now needs to be changed from yes to partly, because we've had meetings at the beginning of this year where it hasn't reported directly to full council, and the items that we've discussed has gone, instead of to full council, it's gone to cabinet for their decision, and I think it's then gone to a scrutiny committee. So with that taking place, I'm not sure that we can tick that as a yes for item 2 on there.
Okay, Kevin?
Sorry, Chair, it was my understanding, Councillor Swinburne, that all kind of meeting minutes subsequently went to council. If that hasn't been the case in some issues, if the committee would like that moved to partly, that's something we can do, and look to maybe address that moving forward to make sure that we put that back into a yes answer rather than a partly.
Chair, if I could come back, I'm not saying that that should be the case. I think it should be that they go to full council. I'm just commenting on what's happened earlier this year. So, I'm happy for that to be discussed.
Scott, is this a separate point or is this on this point?
No, this is on this, Chair, if you don't mind. Obviously, I'm new to the committee. I apologise if it's not right, but clearly, I read the same thing as Councillor Swinburne. So you can't have something where you pick and choose when you want to use it. You see what I mean? So and the Constitution Working Group would also need to be updated, of which I'm a member. We've just updated things around audit, and it says that audit is a committee of full council and reports to full council. And we have, on multiple occasions, which I can think of recently, not done that. And it has, as Councillor Swinburne indicates, gone to Cabinet and other forums. So I think we just need clear around the governance or structure of audit. Is it an audit function of the full council and reports directly to full council for verification on anything? Or does it just pick and choose where it wishes to go? Or not putting you on the spot, Chair, do you pick and choose where it goes? Did you decide that it went in a different direction that of what it's supposed to do on the reports we've referenced? I don't know. It's a naive question from somebody new to the committee.
I mean, it's a very good point raised. I mean, I suppose what you're mentioning, so when we've had the audit committee, the minutes, they have gone to full council. I mean, that is a matter of course, that's happened. What you're referring to is recent recommendations have gone to the cabinet first. And I would share you that raises some concern. There has been discussion. So for example, when we talked about having a working group and working up the terms of reference for that, after we agreed that in principle, we were told, well, that'll be put to the cabinet. So if that's the line of concern, it's something that I would share with you. Where the difficulty comes in is where it is something either by the nature of the decision and time that it has gone to cabinet. So thank you for picking this up. I mean, as I say, on the specific
Chair, would you mind if I returned on that? Because I think it's just critical on this particular point. Yeah. So we have sat at the committee I have been part of. It's then gone to cabinet and wording has then been changed and then it's gone through. So if that's the case, well, what's the point of us agreeing, voting and doing whatever we do as a function of full council is what we are supposed to be.
Right. Alison, do you want to come in? You're on mute.
First one of today. Thank you, Chair. I think the answer is that everybody's right, and that sounds like a bit of a cop-out answer, which I don't mean. But I'll explain the reasoning behind it. Audit committee is a committee of full council, and the various guidelines around local authority audit committees set out that that's the case. The idea behind that is that some matters would be too unwieldy to take into the chamber and, you know, to debate with all members present. So the idea is that we have a smaller group of dedicated members who are able to look at those matters and give them the attention that they deserve. I think in the guidance, and it is only guidance about audit committees, it is recommended that there is an annual report from audit committee or the chair of audit committee to a suitable forum. Now that might be in some local authorities council, in other local authorities it might be cabinet, and I know that's something that Kevin is picking up and looking at with a view to help them to prepare such a report. But I think a lot of it will depend on who the decision maker is. And if audit committee wishes to draw attention to a decision maker of matters that they think the decision maker should bring to bear in the decision which is under consideration, audit committee probably needs to have the choice about where it reports. Some issues it might be more appropriate that a report is made to cabinet, and other issues that may be more appropriate for a report to be made to council. But Councillor Dickinson is entirely correct that audit committee is a committee of full council, and it's something that would be glad to work with the committee to explore further in the coming months if necessary.
Thank you. Stephen, is your point relating to this as well?
No, it isn't. It's a completely different one, Chair. It's just a small point. It's looking at points 15 and 16 on the good practice table. Has the membership of the committee been assessed against the core knowledge and skills framework and found to be satisfactory? That's ticked as partly completed, and obviously it links into the one previously arrangements in place to support the committee with briefings and training. Is there a kind of a structured approach to training the committee? Because obviously we have a variety of levels of experience and skill on the committee at present. So is there an ad hoc approach to this, or is it going to be a structured approach? I know things will be done in 21-22.
Could I remind members to put themselves on mute if they're not speaking? Thank you. Kevin, do you want to come in on Stephen's point?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Stephen. I think the short answer is yes. When we undertook the review in conjunction with the chair, the training and the membership of the committee was something which formed a good deal of that debate and that discussion, as I'm sure those members involved will recall. What we then had was a plan in place to take place during the last 12 months with the audit committees, which obviously then, with the pandemic arrangements, the first couple of meetings didn't take place, and I think it's been affected by that. What we're now doing though is getting those resurrecting, if you like, that program that we had in place, just to make sure, albeit it will have to be in a slightly different form, but making sure that we provide training or briefings to the committee as we move through the year, when we have the new formation of the committee for the new year, starting with the sort of the members induction program, and then building through the year any suitable training briefings which are required as we move through, depending on the items of business on each agenda. Does that answer your question, Stephen?
It does, Kevin. Thank you very much for that. Obviously, at the present time, by the use of Zoom meetings, we've got an ideal opportunity to get the training rolled out, because it's much easier to do training for a big group by Zoom than it is getting everybody together around the table. So obviously it's something I'm quite keen from past experience of audit committees, is sometimes training falls off the agenda, if you like, for the audit committee generally, but it's a good opportunity to get it done at the present, I think. Thanks for that answer.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions or points? Okay, so going back to Councillor Swinburne's point, how we treat this report. I mean, I certainly think it's a very valid point, and I think we have the audit committee by definition needs to report only to the full council, and there has been, and we've had attempts to call into another committee that wasn't applicable to their terms of reference. So I don't know if you, Kevin, can suggest anything else that we can do or to highlight to make sure it's quite clear what the role of the audit committee is. where it sits at the only one that it reports into. And I think it's not so much reporting into, but is answerable, could be overridden. What's the best words to use? Would be the full council, which is the supreme body of the whole council, not any other committee, not the cabinet.
Perhaps, Chair, I mean, I think, as I think Alison said earlier, this is something that we can look at and work with committee to try and make this point a little bit clearer as needed. Yes, Audit Committee is a committee which reports from full council and back to full council. But if that needs strengthened either through the recent changes in the Constitution, or we can change it by means of the annual report, which we're proposing to write, and as part of that work, then we can maybe address it as part of that work, Chair, to make sure that it is as clear as we can possibly make it. And that whilst it is answerable to full council, Audit Committee can make recommendations to other committees, but ultimately comes from full council.
So, and just on Stephen's point about training, which is obviously sort of very relevant and something that I think across the board could always be improved. There are issues about attendance, but I think that might be helped with the accessibility of Zoom. When is the new council in May, after May, whoever that might be, the political parties or any group, in fact, will step down and they appoint their members to various committees. And I suppose the danger is sometimes it can be a tick box exercise. Oh, we need somebody for X, you go on that, you know, that sort of discussion. I mean, the kind of thing I'm thinking of, could the group leaders be sent a short brief about the Audit Committee and the skills and interests that are relevant to the committee to help inform the selection of who the members are? I don't know if that happens in any committee or if it just becomes a bit of a, you're only on 2 committees, we could do with somebody else on, and this is just a general point.
Chair, I think to answer that, I have no idea as to what the current arrangements are regarding either Audit Committee or other committees. I'm not aware that such a thing has been done before, but that's certainly something we could examine if the committee would think that may be helpful in terms of the selection, if you like, for want of a better word, of Audit Committee for
I mean, it's obviously up to the groups, you know, it is their decision, they can do it anyway, but it would, I just think sometimes, like if you were recruiting, appointing anyone to anything, sometimes, as I say, it's a general point, is sometimes maybe thought hasn't always been given into it.
And I think, Chair, this was an issue, as I'm sure you remember, which we discussed in some detail as part of that review with other Audit Committee members at the time, around the ability to choose members for the committee, which obviously we don't have, but it is an interesting point which we can certainly look at moving forward if we think that would be a benefit.
Great. Alison?
Thank you, Chair. I think just to kind of follow up with Kevin's point there, really to be a really good Audit Committee member, you need to have an inquiring mind. It doesn't require any specific expertise in particular disciplines. I think that's the value of the committee, is that we get that kind of shared collective meeting of minds and experience that individual members and co-opted members bring to bear to examination of matters under consideration. But I do think that it would probably be possible to pull together almost like a set of good characteristics of an Audit Committee member. So the thing which is springing to my mind is the ability to act apolitically. Obviously, local authorities by definition are political places. That's the point of them, and that's the point of the chamber in particular for full council. When we have our meetings of Audit Committee, we've talked in the past about the importance of even politics at the door, as much as is possible to do, and to look at the matters in as dispassionate and impartial a way as possible. So those types of things, I think we could probably come up with, 6 or 7 points. And it may be a good thing for everyone who attends the committee to kind of review from time to time to say, and at being able to demonstrate these characteristics of a good audit committee member. But I stress that this is entirely in the vein of being helpful and supportive to our audit committee members. I think that the committee has really demonstrated some excellent work over the course of the last 4 years, and all committee members have contributed fully to that. So I'm not saying that in any way as a criticism, but it's just almost kind of how can we be better? And that's something I think everyone should ask themselves from time to time. So we'd be glad to work with yourself, you know, over the coming weeks to pull something like that together.
Yeah, and I mean, just to share a sort of conversation that I had. I have always commented that the members of the audit committee there's a very good skill set, asking lots of questions, inquiring, scrutinising. And when we came, not to embarrass anyone, to you know, appoint independent members with Peter and Stephen, we thought that they added some specific technical expertise as well to that. So we did have the existing skill set, and any sort of short gaps were, you know, sort of helped filled by Peter and Stephen with that technical experience as well. Okay, so Mark, how would you like to propose and treat in terms of, I suppose we'd need to add some commentary as well as moving it to partly, if that's what you're proposing?
Yes, if we can, please, Chair. I'd feel more comfortable with that, given what's happened earlier this year. But as has already been mentioned with the other explanations, more work does need to be done to give clarity and definition to moving forward on this matter, so that, you know, everyone is aware of what the audit committee is all about. But I would feel better for the time being with a better explanation, and if we did move it to partly, with a view to moving that back to yes in the future, once more work has been done.
Okay.
If the rest of the committee is in agreement with that, you know, it's just me talking, and I know others have made comment, but, you know, obviously the rest of the committee would need to agree on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally happy with moving to partly. It's just the commentary, the explanation on that. So you're mentioning the fact that what's happened with it, with cabinet and attempts at calling elsewhere, and just work to establish the role of the audit committee, and it reports only to the full council.
Yep.
Okay. Does anyone else have any comments specifically on that? Or is everyone happy? And Kevin, are you happy to reword it?
Yes, absolutely, Chair. We reword that, Chair.
Yeah. So does anyone else have any comments? So we consider and endorse the latest self-assessment of our audit committee arrangements subject to the amendment as proposed and to change to partly with the amended commentary, notes the actions taken since the previous review of audit committee, and agrees that the self-assessment undertaken will form the basis of an annual report from audit committee. See the recommendations set out there. Can I see a show of hands that everyone's content with that, with the amendment? Okay. I mean, just to mention something that was raised at the previous meeting, the independent members don't technically vote. So if anything's contentious, or we're actually literally adding up votes, but otherwise I'm quite happy for them to indicate how they're voting. And I think it's obviously good specifically to see their opinion, particularly if it looks like there's any division in the committee. So I'm happy for Peter and Stephen to put their hands up as they do, but just for technicality, they do technically vote, but I think it just makes sense for them to indicate their view with everyone else. Okay. Now, Item 8 is urgent business. To consider such business as, in the opinion of the chair, should be, by reasons of special circumstances, be considered as a matter of urgency. The first item I have is what was circulated late. Apologies for that. Did everyone receive that? Okay, this is the annual governance statement, which when we were approving the accounts, we did defer, which was probably just as well, because a whole load of unforeseen things we weren't aware of also happened following that. So we have the proposed additions to the annual governance statement. Has everyone got that in front of them? Does anyone have any comments or points on this? Anyone? Okay. Can I ask, I don't know if we've got any of the legal team on. We've obviously had this sent to us. It's not on Pink, it's not on confidential. Will that be uploaded onto the website so it's accessible publicly?
Hello, Chair. As far as I'm aware, it will be uploaded as extra information that was circulated, for the meeting.
Great, okay.
I haven't been advised not to do that, so it will be done after this meeting.
Right, okay. Does anyone have any questions or further points? Councillor Swinburne?
Thanks, Chair. There was obviously specific reasons which brought about this amendment, and I feel it's correct to do so. And without going into detail, I'm going to try and choose my words very carefully here. I assume there would be involvement with audit at some point in some of these matters. And it was said some time ago that it was hoped that all of these matters, investigations, concerns, whatever you want to call them, will be concluded as quickly as possible. And as I say, without going into any detail, I'm just wondering if there's any indication of when all of this may be, and any relevant action, etc., as a result of this, so that matters could finally be concluded. As I say, I'm not wanting to go into any details. It's just things have been ongoing for some considerable time, and I'm sure that everybody is hopeful to see the back of all of this. And matters, as I say, I'm sure something would come toward it at some point. It's just, I'm sure we're all glad to see the back of it finally. It just has been some time now, and I'm just wondering if there is any indication as to when all of this will be concluded. Just on the basis that there may be further amendments, really.
Alison?
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if Audit Committee can cast their minds back to a document which was shared by the Deputy Chief Executive in September, which was a governance accountability framework. As with Councillor Swinburne, I am choosing my words carefully because I believe that was in the part 2 session of the committee. But basically that's a framework for managing the issues that Councillor Swinburne is referenced today. I was made the executive team lead for the items that were on that framework. And again, being careful because we are in open session, I can definitely tell the committee that all of those matters which appeared on that framework are being actively managed in the way in which it was described in September onwards. There are a number of external factors and external people who are involved because we are following the agreed processes, which sometimes mean that external entities have to be involved, and that sometimes does take time. But please be assured that everything is under a proper process within the authority and will be concluded through those processes. But I quite agree with the comment made by Councillor Swinburne if there are governance issues which arise from that, it will be appropriate for some form of reporting on those to come before Audit Committee at a suitable juncture in the future. And Kevin and I will make sure that isn't forgotten. Don't know if that answers the question sufficiently.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it does in some way. And I appreciate that, you know, there are ongoing concerns. It's just me concern being that if we're making an amendment now, would we have to make a further amendment depending on outcomes? And I appreciate that's something that can't be answered. It's just, obviously, it is a concern. Thank you.
Can I just make a point? And this is certainly not irritating somebody wanting to say, I told you so. It's actually quite an important point regarding assurance, because obviously the fact that the council's constitution contained something that was unlawful has put the council at significant risk in all sorts of ways, but obviously particularly with financial risk. Now, I think a number of members will recall, but myself and another member, not on this committee, had concerns about the constitution. And given, you know, when you have a lot, it's not one item, you can't say, I think we should motion to amend this. The whole document, there was problems throughout the document. So suggested that a working group was set up to look into that. That was agreed and then nothing happened. Had to be a reminder to set up a working group. Neither myself or the other member who had expressed a particular interest in this were invited onto the working group. The working group reported back, made some cosmetic changes and commentary about people standing up when they speak, and making it longer when you have to give notice to propose a motion. So they actually made things worse. When they reported back, I stood up and said that. I said, you know, I'm sorry, but this is not good enough. This is not enough changes to the constitution. It's cosmetic. It's probably even managed to make it worse. And then obviously this has been found out with quite serious consequences. And actually this is a point where, about the constitution, which other members of the public who might be put in that category of being a bit vexatious and bothering with going on about sort of governance issues, but they were proved right as well. So what assurance can there be given that in terms of, one, the constitution will be updated and we won't have this happening again, but two, that when people are raising concerns about things particularly as important as the constitution, that they will be dealt with properly in the future? And this is obviously not directed, I don't think there's anyone that I would particularly blame, that's only blame who's part of this committee, but it's just assurance that this doesn't happen again, because it's not something that just came up. Myself and others had raised numerous concerns about the constitution before. I don't know, Alison or Kevin, if anyone wants to comment on that.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd be glad to take that. The Constitution is, I think, a strange beast. It was something which was introduced from memory. I think it was around about the year 2000 or 2001, a requirement that local authorities produce these. Traditionally, they are handled by officers in the legal team, and there's a good reason for that, because they are very kind of legalistic in their nature and are based on kind of a number of legal powers. I don't know what the council's procedures were for updating its constitution previously. We've obviously had the benefit of a very experienced legal a solicitor who's worked as a monitoring officer for a very long career in Caroline Elwood, who worked with us from October onwards. And with her expert eye, she took a good look at the Constitution and overhauled aspects of it where she knew that it could do with revision. From discussion with Caroline, she talked about her experience. She works in a number of authorities as a locum, a temporary legal person, and she says that the experiences, the things that she proposed for change in Northumberland are not unusual. So when she goes around other local authorities, she finds these. So I think it's important that we are aware that it isn't that Northumberland has been unusual or different in that. But I think what you're saying, Chair, is right, that it does demonstrate how important it is to have a good approach planned for review, regular review of the Constitution, to make sure that it is fit for purpose, both in terms of the legal framework that it reflects, but also any local circumstances that we feel as an authority should be reflected. So I think that the challenge will now be for us and the legal team in particular to make sure that we have arrangements in place so that it doesn't fall you know, by the wayside, having, you know, pulled it into a new format in the way that Caroline has. So what I'll do is I'll take that back to our deputy monitoring officers and make sure that they've been made aware of this and come up with a plan to make sure that the Constitution, that there are procedures in place to regularly review it. We obviously have the Constitution Working Group, which is an important part of the process, but I think that there is a role for officers before we go anywhere near the members with regard to the proposals which are made.
Great, thank you. Jan?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back to a question that was asked earlier about whether there'll be a need to further update the AGS as these matters are worked through. I assume the question was in relation to the various staffing, whistleblowing and code of conduct issues. I think for the purposes of the AGS, it's sufficient that we've acknowledged that these things have happened in the period, you know, in question that's covered by the AGS. And the AGS doesn't need to set out, you know, the resolution of all of those issues, merely that they are being dealt with through the appropriate processes. However, the AGS does have to be complete as at the point that the accounts, you know, are certified, and it is always possible that some further issues that need to be reflected in the AGS will arise in the next couple of months while that external audit work is being completed. But for now, what we need the committee to do is just to give its approval that it is an accurate reflection and that, you know, it's complete. So there are no other major governance or significant governance issues that we are aware of at this point in time that haven't been reflected in the AGS. So just I hope that's helpful clarification. And it obviously goes without saying that, you know, this is an important document which, you know, Cameron and his external, excuse me, his external audit team will carefully consider as part of their value for money work. So, you know, it's important that if there are things which the committee feels ought to be mentioned in the statement that aren't, that, you know, that we're clear about that now. But it's always possible that something else, you know, will arise, in which case we may need to come back to you again, but hopefully not. Thank you, Chair.
That's fine. I mean, from my point of view, it does mention the specific issue. So the specific issue, and does mention the sort of wider issues that are still outstanding. So I think I'm comfortable with the reporting that's been done. Does anyone else have any comments, questions? Okay, so we've been asked to agree the AGS with the proposed amendments. Can I see a proposer for that? Councillor Swinburne, seconder, then Grimshaw, and a show of hands. That should be suffice. Don't see any dissent. That's fine. Thank you very much. Cameron, is your urgent business, is this in part 1 or is that to be part 2?
There's nothing I would be talking about in terms of audit progress today that I feel would be necessary to be included in part 2.
Great.
And
Okay.
the main focus of the update would be in relation to the accounts themselves.
Okay.
I can give you a quick update in terms of where we think we're at in value for money, but that's there's still quite a few judgments that we need to reach, and we're still waiting for some information from the council to top and tail that. I can give you a brief update in terms of where we're at in terms of the audit of Advanced Northumberland, having been briefed by the partner responsible for that audit yesterday. I'm happy to take questions. What I should say is we issued the interim, we decided on balance to issue an interim audit completion report, but we only managed to get that out to officers last Thursday evening for consideration. We'd hoped it might have hit the committee, but unfortunately not. But with your permission, Chair, perhaps if I go through that in a little bit of detail just now to allow officers to issue that once we've agreed some of the content of it, which we haven't agreed yet. And I guess it'll be up to, if I can see Alan Mason's on the call, so it'll be up to Alan or whoever else to say if there's anything they disagree with at this stage. But I'm not going to go into the huge detail about every single thing that we've identified in the accounts, if that's okay. You can read it after the event, but I can give you a flavour of where we're at. I can give you a flavour of what the issues are that are slowing things down at this stage, and I can give you a flavour of next steps, if that's all right.
Yes, please. Yeah, thank you.
So I'll start with where we're at. We've made a lot of progress in terms of the audit of the council. So if you think through the accounts, a significant number of the different numbers in the accounts that are material, we've completed the audit work on those. There are some areas where we are just waiting for answers to queries or a little bit of more evidence. So the bulk of the work's done, but where we've picked a sample, we've not got everything back yet. Yep. In terms of the risks we identified in the audit plan that we brought earlier to the committee, I'll just quickly go through those, chairs, if that's all right.
Yep.
So in terms of management override of control, so that is obviously quite a key one in terms of the audit process, because that's one of the key fraud risks that we tend to focus our attention on. So we look very carefully at management interventions in the accounts using things called journals, which is basically somebody fills something in, it's posted into the ledger, ends up in the accounts. So clearly that's a way that management could make the position of the council look better or worse than it actually is. We look at anything that we would consider to be an unusual transaction, and then we focus our attention on the key sort of judgments and the estimates in the accounts, because not everything in there is a matter of fact. So at this stage, we've not quite finished the work in that area, but we've got nothing to report. So personally, I think that's a good thing. It's obviously a wee bit disappointing sometimes in an external auditor when you don't find anything, but personally, I think I prefer the alternative. In terms of revenue recognition, so this is to do with the risk that the council's recognising revenue essentially in the wrong year. That's where we focus our attention on that. And again, we've got a little bit of work still to complete in terms of samples, but at this stage, nothing significant to report in that area. Again, that's important because that is the other key potential fraud risk in terms of the work we do. We have completed our work on pensions, which obviously is a huge number in the council's accounts, and we have nothing particularly significant to report apart from there are a number of schools that converted to academy status over the last few years, and the assets and liabilities associated with the staff that are admitted members of the LGPS haven't been written out of the accounts in prior years and should have been. So we've had to estimate the impact of that, and that's one of the issues I think we're still discussing with Alan. In terms of property, plant and equipment, this is obviously quite an important area of the audit from our point of view, because it's a big number in your accounts. It's a big number in Advanced Northumberland's groups in terms of investment property. We do a lot of work in this area. The work in this area is ongoing. There are several issues in here around about, most notably the valuation of the energy from waste plant, which we feel looks a little bit unusual based on our experience from elsewhere. So that's something we're in discussion with officers about, the valuation approach and the numbers in the accounts. Not particularly unusual, because that seems to have been an issue in a number of places this last 12 months. Certainly I can name at least another 3 audits where we've had an issue. That linked to that issue is it's a PFI, and we have some issues around about the accounting based on the PFI model as well, which again looks a little bit out of step with what we'd expect based on experience elsewhere. In terms of PPE, there are a few other issues around about valuation that we're still working through, and another issue in relation to infrastructure assets, which you'll be aware, Chair, probably are roads, bridges, culverts and that sort of thing. One of the key tests we've got to do is, does something exist? Do you own it? And we're still waiting on evidence from the council around about those 2 issues for a sample. It's not massively unusual. We quite often end up having to go back to highways teams to ask them to prove it. And we're still working through that with Alan and his team as it stands at the moment. In terms of the other areas, we identified the valuation of, to use old terminology, debtors on your balance sheet, and that was solely to do with the impact of the pandemic at the end of March last year. We've more or less finished that work. There is 1 or 2 items in the sample we're waiting on evidence, but to date nothing significant that we'll have to report subsequently, and you'll see that in the report when we issue it. And we also, if you remember, Chair, we identified as an enhanced risk the council's investment in Newcastle Airport. It's quite obvious why we did that. If you live anywhere near the flight path like I do, you probably appreciate the fact that in February, March and after the year end, the number of flights dropped off significantly. Clearly that has an impact on the valuation of an investment. We spent a bit of extra time doing the audit work on that, but we haven't got anything to identify in relation to that. So we don't think the investment's materially misstated, if that makes sense. In terms of other things, we have identified a reasonably largish number of control deficiencies that we've reported. We're still discussing those with Alan and his team. A reasonable number of those are IT related, to do with access controls, passwords, change control, etc., etc. I have to say, generally speaking, that group of issues tend to come up quite regularly, and I suspect certain ones are things that have been reported in the past, but still need to be addressed going forward as well. There's a few other ones around about some specific financial controls, but not hugely significant. We've categorized the recommendations we've made to date as medium. Our definition of medium it'll be different to internal audits, but it's a need to strengthen internal control or enhance business efficiency. Recommendations should be actioned in the near future. So you'll see that when we issue the report, and 3 low priority recommendations as well, which is essentially do it when you get the chance to do it, but not a significant deficiency. I'm not going to go through the amendments that have been made to the accounts to date, Chair. There have been quite a significant number of disclosure amendments in relation to both the single entity and the group accounts, which we have discussed with Alan. I'm just saying Alan because he's here, otherwise it would be Alison and Alan. And those amendments have been made. We've got 1 or 2 unadjusted misstatements that aren't material, so we'll be seeking a representation from the audit committee in relation to those areas, well, approval of the audit committee for Jan to sign the letter of representation, and then there's a few others that have already been amended. But fundamentally, the key area that needs to be sorted out is the valuation of some of the property, plant and equipment in the council's balance sheet, and the underlying PFI model for the waste recycling centre. On VFM, we are busy working through the issues that have been identified over the last, well, over our time as your external auditor. We followed up the issues raised by EY last year, so we'll report on those at a later date. And we've highlighted a few areas. The annual governance statement touches on some of those. The amendment that was just been discussed around about the constitution. clearly, from our point of view, looking at the governance criteria that applies to the council, we need to conclude on whether or not a robust constitution was in place at the 31st March 2020. In light of the discussion that's just been had at the Audit Committee and discussions with the Chief Executive, Kelly, Chris previously, and Jan, that will result in a qualification of the VFM conclusion. We can't really do anything otherwise, we feel, because otherwise we'd be saying that actually the arrangements were robust at that point in time, which clearly they weren't. That aside, I think the thing we didn't report perhaps at the last committee, which is an oversight on our part, was you'll be aware that we are also being commissioned to carry out procedures on certain grant claims that the council is responsible for and must submit to certain government departments. The key ones are the benefits grant claim that goes to the Department for Work and Pensions, the pooling claim that goes to MHCLG in terms of capital receipts from housing disposals, and also the work we have to do in terms of teachers' pensions. So all that work's been concluded. There were no particularly significant issues raised by that work, and those have all been submitted off by the required deadlines to the various departments. So just to provide assurance to the committee that that's happened. So that's, I mean, that's a reasonably comprehensive. In terms of the advance audit, that is nearing completion as well. The key issues that have been identified by the team involved in that audit have been more or less resolved. There's a little bit of topping and tailing still to be done, but we're hoping that that audit should be signed off in the very near future, which is great because obviously those entries are then consolidated into the group and we need that work done before we can sign off the county.
Okay.
So I'm happy to take questions from anybody about those specifics. And I don't know if Alan might want to come back on any of the points I've quickly briefed you on.
Okay. Alan, do you want to come in?
No, I think I agree with what Cameron's saying, and just to confirm that we're obviously trying to turn requests for information around as quickly as possible and get the information back to Cameron and his team.
Great. Excellent. Does anyone else have any questions or comments, or we look forward, if that's the right word, but we'll obviously receive those completed reports in due course. Alison, you have your hand up.
Sorry, Chair, I seem to have really struggled with the mute button today.
It's all right.
I think it's just perhaps a good opportunity to make the point that I think the external auditor's job is a difficult one, and it requires a really good work and relationship with the authority to enable the external auditor to do the difficult job that they have to do. And I think it's maybe just to inquire of Cameron if he's received everything that he needs. If he hasn't, and it may not be the forum for Cameron to kind of pipe up and give chapter and verse, if not, but if he could make sure that Jan and I know about that, we will do everything that we can to expedite any information that may be outstanding that you need. I think it's incumbent on officers to be timely with this and to put an end date and a responsible, accountable officer to make sure that you have everything that you need. So I think really just I know Cameron will know that that offer is always there, but I think it's perhaps a good opportunity to reiterate that in the committee today.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into details, Alison, but I'll just respond quickly. I think most of the things are in relation to the accounts are a combination of a few different things. One, it's a first year audit. So we picked up the audit later than we would have liked. In ideal circumstances, and we didn't really start effectively until March last year. That slowed things down. Then the pandemic came along and that's not helped. It's fairly usual for a new auditor to pick things up because we all have slightly different focuses in some ways. But I think it's a combination of all those different factors that have led to some delays in getting information back. But hopefully we're sort of on the end straight now, really, in terms of getting the accounts out of the way. On VFM, there's still ongoing discussions with Alison, Jan, and others within the council just to get the evidence we need. But I'm sure that'll be forthcoming. We certainly had no sense that we've not been given things we've asked for. It's just generally been a bit delayed.
Great. Okay. Anyone else? No. Okay, well, thank you very much, Cameron. So,
sorry, Chair.
Sorry.
Can I just, sorry, I started with a question and forgot to follow up at the end. My question was around about, we have drafted the interim audit completion report, so that deals with everything we've identified to date. Ideally, what we'd like to do with the committee's agreement is not produce another one with everything we've already reported again at a later date and just focus on the things since. But that would require us to send a copy of the report once it's agreed with the finance team, as it stands at the moment, to the audit committee outside of the meeting. Well, basically after this meeting. So you've actually got it in plenty of time. So if you've got anything for the next committee, you can raise that at the time. Does that make sense? Because otherwise I think you're going to end up with something twice and repeated and duplicated. I don't know if I've explained that very well. I think there's a few confused looking faces.
No, so it's an interim report that you want to send us.
Yeah.
But it's not complete.
Yeah. It summarizes everything we've done and what we've found to date in the areas that are broadly complete. It's with Alison and Alan at the moment for comments, which we anticipate getting back today, tomorrow, I think. At that point, we will finalize that interim report. Now, you could wait till the next committee to get something with everything in it, but that's a little while away, or it can be issued outside of that cycle. So members can have a look through it. If anybody's got a query, Chair, through yourself, and then perhaps they could raise that with you and then through you to us, and we'll answer that via you going forward.
Okay. I mean, I don't have any objection to that. Obviously, I mean, normally we wait for finalised reports, but I don't know if anyone has any. Alan, do you have any, or Alison, do you have any comments? No. So is everyone happy that once you've spoken to the finance team, the finalised, is this a finalised draft report will be sent to us?
It'll be a finalised final report, but it's just an interim. So we'll need to update you for the areas that aren't complete. So when we issue the next one, it'll just concentrate the areas that aren't complete, rather than everything we've already done and that's been amended or not amended, if you see what I mean. So it is a final report, it's just an interim because we've not finished yet. And we felt that the committee might want an update, a formal update in terms of progress.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. Does anyone have any issues, anything they want to raise? Okay, thank you very much. The date of the next meeting is scheduled to take place on Wednesday, 26th of May. As we've mentioned before, that is unlikely because the new audit committee won't likely have been appointed by them. Well, they won't have been appointed. They might have been provisionally, but they won't have been confirmed because there won't have been a full council unless anything changes. So the date of the next meeting, although it's scheduled, is likely to take place in June or July. Okay, now we have items on the agenda that are listed as part 2 exempt under the provisions of section 184 of the Local Government Act 1972. Can I see a show of hands that we agree that we'll move into part 2? Could somebody confirm that the recording is switched off?